Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Now we are switching gears to mental health. And it's a time when we have to start talking again about mental health, keeping your sanity. A lot of things have happened recently with the story we saw yesterday about Lazy Writer and Damisa. Of course, at the time we're talking about this right now, his whereabouts are still unknown, so there's no clarity as to whether, what he said in that suicide note has happened or not. But someone who has some ideas as to how this kinds of depression can affect a person and somehow managed to come out of it on top is our next guest. We have with us Chude Jideonwo, who is the author and TV host, joining us from our Lagos studio. Hi, Chude. It's nice to have you on the program.
Good to see you again.
Merry Christmas. Compliments of the season.
Same to you.
I want to get your thoughts on what's happening with Lazy Writer first. Everyone knows him as Lazy Writer, but his real name is Anda Damisa. People are still trying to find out where he is. Is he okay? Has what he wrote in that note happened? Could you talk to us a little bit about that kind of feeling that people can have, especially on the internet?
Right. I haven't read up on that particular story. However, just linking it to the thing that we saw a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, with the young man, Pella. And I think that what struck me was, when the Pella thing happened, I think there was a statement from the head of the Road Safety Corps. And his response was that these content creators are trivializing road safety. And I thought that missed out on the reality that this was a young man who was going through trauma and turmoil, no matter how slight it might seem to other people. And there is a tendency, because our country has so many big issues, we're just talking about the accident yesterday, we're talking about the crises in the Middle Belt, and I was there last month. There is a sense in which we think that personal trauma is a small thing. Like we have bigger issues to deal with. Let's not take this seriously. And I think that incidences like what happened, what is ongoing, however it might end with Lazy Writer, what happened with Pella, the news from the actor Tonto Dike and all of that kind of shows us that we have a country where people are dealing with intense mental pressure. We have a country where people are dealing with intense emotional pressure. We have a country where people can't find the help that they need. We have a country where people are, public or private, are suffering. Are suffering in their minds, are suffering in their hearts. And when we see it bleed into the public space, it should remind us of how serious the mental health crisis is. It should remind us, if a celebrity, if a known person bleeds in public emotionally, it tells you that there are so many others, tens, hundreds, thousands, who are bleeding in private. And how we handle the public incidents signal to the private people that their own mental health struggles to be taken seriously or not.
Chude, let's talk about you. You famously said that, your own depression kind of was a blessing in disguise. Earlier in the year, here in the nation's capital, we saw a young man. He climbed the mast at Aso radio station. He just climbed it and sat there and was looking, and everyone was so scared he was going to kill himself. But it was identified afterwards that this was a man who was going through severe depression. Now, you've talked about your depression and your suicide attempt and how that depression was a blessing in disguise. Could you talk to us about that situation?
Thank you. So in my book, I talk about the research about depression. I say depression is a disease of perspective. And by that, I don't mean that it is not, there's a way people say, oh, it's all in your mind. And by that, they mean, oh, don't take it so seriously. No, what I mean is that the way that depression happens, the way that the science has defined it is, I explain to people, imagine that the building I'm in, the background is black or blue. However, somebody who is watching it can only see red. They have a condition where no matter what the reality of the color is, all they can see is red. That's how depression functions. Your mind can only see a particular set of circumstances. It doesn't matter what the reality is. It doesn't matter if things are really good for you, if you have money, if you have love. If your mind has chosen a perspective for you, the objective reality doesn't matter. And that's how people can understand that it's an illness. If a color behind me is blue, and a person has a condition where they can only see red, we would immediately see it as an illness. But when it's the mind, it's difficult to explain. So that's what I try to explain with that. It's like your mind has chosen a perspective for you no matter what you do. So that's what's happening to that young man. So people are looking at him and saying, calm down, calm down. And his mind cannot move. His mind is existing in a different place than what other people can see. And that's what happened with me. Everything was objectively going well. I write in the book, this was the best time of my life. I was working on 3 continental campaigns, all of that. But I was facing an internal turmoil that was resistant to the objective reality. And luckily, in my own case, I didn't attempt suicide. I thought about it. But even the idea that a person who is economically successful, who is reputationally successful, who, you know, has loving family, the idea that even such a person can get to the point in their lives where they can think of ending their lives shows you the illogic of depression. So I hit rock bottom at that point, mentally, emotionally. I got to a point where I thought, you know, you are raised to believe that once you have money, once you have fame, once you have all of these things, that they are enough. They will make you happy. They will help you live the kind of emotional reality you want. And then you get there and you realize, no, that there is more to life. There's more to life than that. There is integratedness. There is a sense of authenticity that you want to live in your own life. There are deeper values that are important to the human spirit that are not just material. I mean, so I got to that point. I learned that. And that's what I say that changed.
There's a concept. Yeah, I was going to say there's a concept right now called the functional depressive. I think that's what you're referring to right now. So, and you know, it's a very strange concept that someone who's very functional, but you do have to look for the telltale signs. Because when we talk about depression in Nigeria, we assume that the person is sad and gloomy and in a corner, but they're actually very functional depressants who are working very hard. In fact, overworking, taking up more tasks than you can handle is actually a sign of depression, according to what it is that we've seen right now. But how do we check up on our friends who may be going through one form of depression, especially the Yuletide? We both know psychologically that this is when most depression shows itself, is around the Yuletide season during celebrations. How do we check up on our friends who may be depressed right now?
There's a blog, an American blog I like called The Radicalist. And I was reading, the author was saying that most of the things that we call friendships these days are actually funships, where we have replaced the deep function. You know, 2 things you said. The famous psychologist, philosopher Carl Jung, talked about the social mask, the persona. Many of us, all of us, wear masks to go out in public. You cannot go out telling people, everybody you meet your problems. So most of us wear social masks. And I interviewed the MD of Sterling Bank on my show a few years ago, and he said, true friendships are the people in your life with whom you don't have to wear a mask. Now, the first answer to that question is to be sure that the people that we call friends are people with whom we really don't have to wear masks. If those are the people that we really have in our lives, then our jobs are to continue to have a set of honest, authentic conversations with friends. Conversations where our friends do not feel that they will be judged if they speak to us about the ridiculous or big issues they are dealing with. I tell people that sometimes, young people these days, sometimes when you say somebody is unhappy, they say those are first world problems. And I say, anything can make a person sad. Anything can make a person depressed. You cannot minimize what has made a person depressed. And so if your friend, if you have a real friendship, and that friend is able to communicate to you honestly about what they are going through, if you create the environment where they feel that peace, that can be enough. Because sometimes what people need most is just to be heard, just to be listened to. They don't even need to be understood. They just need to know that the people in their lives will take whatever they are going through seriously at that time. So to summarize the answer to that question, 1, we have to be sure that the people that are in our lives that we call friends are actual friends. They're not just people that are there for fun. They're not people that are there for parties. They're not just people that are there to show off our cars with, but people that we can really remove our masks and be authentic with. And then we must create the environment where our friends can be honest with us about the deep issues they are going through. We may not even have answers or solutions, but they must trust us that if they speak, we will listen. That is often enough.
Good to know that at least you're doing well. So could you tell us, I mean, you know, almost everywhere you turn in society, maybe such as ours, even in religious houses, in your small community, different areas where you think you have people or friends that you can talk to, you have a certain group of people who are there and they're judgmental about you or whatever it is that you do. So in your case, could you tell us, because just looking at the whole title, it's just kind of wondering, how did you get to that point?
Question. It's a long story, so I have to compress it as effectively as possible. What was happening was, and this is part of why I talk about these issues, because we don't talk enough about them in our societies, because we think that they are flimsy. So on an objective basis, economically, reputationally, like I said, this was 2015, 2016. I had just finished working on the national campaign in 2015. I was working on 2 national campaigns, one in Senegal and another in Ghana. So objectively, everything was going on well. I was the CEO of one of the top PR companies in the country. But in my personal life, my friendships were fraying, my relationships were collapsing, and my health, I'd say that at the time I was diagnosed with something called Tourette's syndrome. So it was a perfect storm of personal trouble, And then in all of that, I had what I call the first financial crisis I ever had in my life. So I was what people have called a prodigy. I published my first book at the age of 14. So all through the time from 14 to 31, I'd never really failed. For the first time in 2016, I stared failure in the face. So that was the last straw that broke the camel's back. You have all these other personal issues that are lingering underneath, that I'm barely coping with. And then on top of it, I had the fear of failure. That for the first time in my life, I was going to fail, and I was going to fail publicly. And my mind found that too hard to take. I remember I wrote in the book, at a point I was speaking at an event at the Whitbaker Hotel in Lagos, along with other business leaders, MDs of banks. And we were talking about economic volatility. And I sat on stage, and I was thinking to myself, is this how I'm going to fail? And everybody watching me is not able to help me. Yeah? And so that was the sense that I felt. Like, and all of us feel it. All of us, we don't talk about it enough in our society, but all of us have a time in our lives where we feel intensely alone and misunderstood, when we feel like we cannot find somebody who can help us. And so these set of circumstances I described, they all came together in one year, 2016. And like I say in my book, my mind collapsed. And that's how I got to that point, where you look, and I was saying that depression is a disease of perspective, where I look into the future, and the future didn't seem bright. And it's not even about wealth. It's not about money alone, because as we've said, rich people can be depressed. It was that I looked at my relationships, I looked at my health, I looked at my life's trajectory, and it suddenly didn't feel bright anymore, and my mind could no longer take it. That's what led to the depression.
It's bad enough that we don't talk about this enough, because society, quote unquote, may be bogged down with all kinds of matters. But our health sector, we all know we have a huge challenge. Do you think we have enough professionals, or are they appreciable, to even understand this kind of matter, to talk about it and have people come to them unashamedly and talk about these things?
Yeah. 2 things, 2 levels to that. Sadly not. I think the last time we did the National Depression Survey, I think in 2018, and I think at that time there was 1 psychiatrist or 1 psychologist to every 100,000 people. That is a crisis. It's a crisis when depression is the #1 disability globally. Yeah, it's a crisis. That's on the one hand. We don't have enough licensed professionals that are able to help people who are dealing with all kinds of mental health crises. On the one hand, things like depression and anxiety that are popular. We have I think, according to the last survey we did, I think 4.5% of the population at the minimum are dealing with depression symptoms at least once in a year. So if we have such a crisis, 4% of our population is what? I think it's more than, I think the numbers were about 40 million people, if I'm not mistaken. And we had less than 1 psychiatrist to 100,000 people. So that's on the one hand. So we have a crisis of that. But on the second hand is that because of the shame and the stigma, which is one of the reasons I did this book, people don't want to go for help. I interviewed the magazine publisher, Betty Rabo, a few years ago, and she said when she was going through depression and she was going to the Yaba Psychiatric Hospital, her driver told her not to go because he said that place is for mad people. Meanwhile, this is a place where people are licensed to help people who are dealing with emotional and mental illnesses. But that stigma stops people from going to seek for help. So we have a perfect storm where, like much of the world, we have a growing mental health crisis, especially amongst younger and younger people. We have too few therapists. We have a lack of therapists. But even for the therapists we have, even for the people who can afford it, they do not go and seek for the help because of the stigma of mental health. So Lagos State government, for instance, has a toll-free line where people can reach out. Most people don't take advantage of it because we still feel that there is a stigma when it comes to our minds, our hearts, and our spirits. So it's a big crisis. We need more young people to be encouraged to go read psychology, to major in psychiatry. We need the profession to be given its right of place in the public consciousness. But more importantly, we need people who need the help that these therapists can offer to have the courage and the clarity to say, I will go and get help no matter what anybody thinks. And as a society, we need to make it safe mentally, emotionally, for people to go and get the help that they need.
There are several aspects to your story that we'll need to explore much later, because, I mean, next year, from January 1st, for instance, I mean, people will be grappling with taxation matter. It will drive some people crazy. So the challenges of the country will never go away. So maybe what we will do is we'll have to find time and have you back on such that, I mean, I hope that people must have picked a thing or two about the symptoms. How do they know that this is knocking on their door, and when it happens, what should they do? So all those kind of conversation we will have much later when we have you back on. So we appreciate your coming on, and good to see that you're doing well, as we all can see. So please keep doing what you're doing, and thank you very much indeed for talking to us today.
Thank you for having me on.